Memory is not a recording. This is the single most important thing that every person who has ever served on a jury should understand, and the single most important thing that most of them do not. Memory is not a video camera. It does not store events and play them back with perfect accuracy. Memory is a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it from fragments, and in that rebuilding, things change. Details shift, faces blur, certainties harden into convictions that feel absolutely real and are absolutely wrong. In the spring of 1994, a 9-year-old girl named Lily Cartwright looked at a photograph lineup and pointed to a man she said had hurt her neighbor. She was certain. She did not hesitate. She was wrong. And the man she pointed to, a 31-year-old teacher named Daniel Souza, would spend the next 19 years in prison before the truth finally found its way out. Lily Cartwright is not a villain in this story. She was 9 years old. She had witnessed something terrifying, and her mind had done what minds do under extreme stress. It had reached for the nearest available face, the face she associated most strongly with that evening, and it had locked that face into place as the answer. The villain in this story is a system that took the word of a traumatized child, placed it at the center of a murder trial without adequate scrutiny, and sent an innocent man away for nearly 2 decades. It was a warm April evening in 1994, in the small coastal town of Mercer Bay, Oregon. A town of perhaps 6,000 people. The kind of place where children still played outside after dinner and neighbors still left their doors unlocked. At approximately 8:30 that evening, a 52-year-old woman named Helen Marsh was found dead in the side passage between her house and the neighboring fence. She had been attacked. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Her handbag, which she had been carrying when she left the house to walk to the corner store, was missing. The only witness was Lily Cartwright, 9 years old, the daughter of Helen Marsh's next-door neighbors. Lily had been playing in her front garden when she heard a sound from the side passage. She had looked toward the fence. In the fading evening light, she had seen a figure, male, she thought, adult, moving away from the passage and down the street. She ran inside. She told her mother. Her mother called the police. The figure Lily had seen was perhaps 30 meters away. The light was failing. The sighting lasted, by her own account, less than 5 seconds. From those 5 seconds, in that failing light, at that distance, an entire prosecution would be built. Daniel Souza was 31 years old in the spring of 1994. He taught 5th grade at Mercer Bay Elementary School, the same school that Lily Cartwright attended, though she was not in his class. He was known by his colleagues as patient and dedicated. His students' parents described him as one of those rare teachers who genuinely changed things for children. He lived 4 streets from Helen Marsh. He had spoken to her perhaps twice in passing over the 5 years he had lived in the neighborhood. He had no criminal record. He had no history of violence. He had been at home on the evening of the murder, grading papers alone. He had no alibi that could be verified, and he lived nearby, and Lily Cartwright went to his school. Those were essentially the facts that put him in the frame. When the police conducted a photograph lineup 6 days after the murder, they included Daniel Souza's photograph. The procedure was not conducted blind. The detective present knew which photograph was the suspect. Later research would show that this single factor, more than almost any other, increases the likelihood of misidentification. Unconscious cues, expressions, body language. Witnesses pick them up, even from police officers who believe they are giving nothing away. Lily Cartwright looked at the 6 photographs for 40 seconds. Then she pointed to Daniel Souza. She said, "That's him. I'm sure." The trial of Daniel Souza took place in January 1995. He was charged with murder in the 1st degree. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on Lily Cartwright's identification. There was no physical evidence linking Daniel to the scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fibers, no footprints that matched. Helen Marsh's missing handbag was never found. No murder weapon was ever recovered. What the prosecution had was a child witness. And child witnesses, as it turned out, were extraordinarily powerful in courtrooms in the mid-1990s. The assumption, reasonable on the surface, catastrophically wrong in practice, was that children do not lie about serious things. That children's memories are purer, less contaminated by motive and self-interest than adult memories. The science said otherwise. The science had been saying otherwise for years. But the science had not yet reached the courtroom in Mercer Bay, Oregon. Lily Cartwright testified. She was calm. She was clear. She pointed at Daniel Souza in the dock and she said, "That is the man I saw. Daniel's defense attorney challenged the identification. He brought in an expert on eyewitness memory. The expert explained the science, the unreliability of cross-racial identification, the effect of stress on memory encoding, the problems with non-blind lineup procedures. The jury listened for 11 days. They deliberated for 2. Guilty. Daniel Souza was sentenced to life imprisonment. He stood in that courtroom and looked at the jury that had just taken everything from him, and he said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had told the truth at every point. The truth had not been enough. 19 years is a very long time. It is long enough to watch your parents age from healthy middle age to frailty. Long enough to miss your younger brother's wedding, the birth of his children, their first steps and first words and first days of school. Long enough to watch the world transform around you. The internet arriving, smartphones changing everything, 2 wars starting and ending, while you remain fixed in place, in a cell, in a system that has decided who you are. Daniel Souza entered Crestwood State Penitentiary in Oregon in March 1995. He was 32 years old. He had been a teacher. In prison, he continued to teach, running informal literacy classes for inmates who had never learned to read properly, helping others prepare for their GED examinations. He could not stop being what he was. He filed appeals in 1997, in 2001, in 2004. Each was rejected. Each rejection cost him something. Not hope exactly, because hope had become a more careful, rational thing. But each rejection cost him time. And Daniel Souza was becoming acutely aware that time was the one thing he could not recover. His mother wrote to him every week for 12 years. Then her eyesight began to fail. Then his father died, in 2007, of a heart attack, and Daniel was not permitted to attend the funeral. And he sat in his cell holding a photograph of his father that had been taken at Daniel's college graduation, before any of this, back when the future was still the future. He said later that the worst part of long-term wrongful imprisonment is not the injustice itself, though the injustice is immense. The worst part is the waiting, the not knowing, the possibility that you will die in here, that the truth will never come, that the world outside will simply move on and forget that you exist. He said, you have to decide every single day whether you're going to keep going. It's not a decision you make once. You make it again every morning. Lily Cartwright was 9 years old when she pointed at Daniel Souza's photograph. By 2010, she was 25. She had studied psychology at university. Drawn to it, she would later say, by questions she had carried since childhood without fully understanding them. Questions about perception, about memory, about how the mind constructs reality. In her second year of postgraduate study, she encountered the research on eyewitness memory and false identification. She read the studies on childhood testimony. She read the specific literature on non-blind lineup procedures and unconscious experimenter influence. And something shifted in her. It shifted slowly. It took months, because what was shifting was not an abstract intellectual position. It was the ground beneath her own memory. The certainty she had carried for 16 years. The absolute conviction that she had seen Daniel Souza on that April evening in 1994. She began to ask herself questions she had never allowed herself to ask before. How far away had the figure been? How long had she actually looked? What had the light been like? Had there been any indication from the detective? Any expression, any pause, any almost imperceptible shift when she had hovered over Daniel Souza's photograph? The answers that came back frightened her. In the autumn of 2012, Lily Cartwright contacted the Oregon Innocence Project. She told them what she had come to understand. She said, I don't think I was lying. I think I was wrong. And I think a man has been in prison for 18 years because of what I said. Lily Cartwright was 9 years old when she pointed at Daniel Souza's photograph. By 2010, she was 25. She had studied psychology at university. Drawn to it, she would later say, by questions she had carried since childhood without fully understanding them. Questions about perception, about memory, about how the mind constructs reality. In her second year of postgraduate study, she encountered the research on eyewitness memory and false identification. She read the studies on childhood testimony. She read the specific literature on non-blind lineup procedures and unconscious experimenter influence. And something shifted in her. It shifted slowly. It took months, because what was shifting was not an abstract intellectual position. It was the ground beneath her own memory. The certainty she had carried for 16 years. the absolute conviction that she had seen Daniel Souza on that April evening in 1994. She began to ask herself questions she had never allowed herself to ask before. How far away had the figure been? How long had she actually looked? What had the light been like? Had there been any indication from the detective? Any expression, any pause, any almost imperceptible shift when she had hovered over Daniel Souza's photograph? The answers that came back frightened her. In the autumn of 2012, Lily Cartwright contacted the Oregon Innocence Project. She told them what she had come to understand. She said, "I don't think I was lying. I think I was wrong. And I think a man has been in prison for 18 years because of what I said." Daniel Souza was 50 years old when his attorney called him to the prison office on a Tuesday morning in February 2014 and told him that a judge had reviewed the new DNA evidence and signed an order for his immediate release. He said later that he did not believe it at first. Not fully. He had been through too many disappointments, too many hopes that had dissolved on contact with the reality of the system. He sat in the office for a long time after the call, not moving, as if stillness might protect him from another collapse. Then the prison officer opened the office door and said, "Mr. Souza, you need to start getting your things together." He walked out of Crestwood State Penitentiary on February 19th, 2014. He was 50 years old. He had entered those gates at 32. His mother was there. She was 73, and her eyesight was poor, and she had driven to the prison with Daniel's brother because she had said she would be there when he came out, and she had meant it, and 19 years had not changed that. She held his face in her hands when he reached her. She could not see him clearly anymore. She touched his face with her hands, and she said, "I knew. I always knew." He could not speak. He stood in the car park of the prison in the pale February morning and held his mother and could not speak. 6 months after Daniel Souza's release, Lily Cartwright wrote him a letter. She had been advised by attorneys not to make direct contact. She made it anyway. She said she understood if he never wanted to hear from her. She said she did not expect forgiveness. She said she simply needed him to know that she understood what had happened, that she understood her role in it, and that she was sorry in a way that no words seemed adequate to contain. Daniel Souza replied 3 weeks later. His letter was 2 pages long. He told her about the 19 years, not to accuse her. The tone was not accusatory, but because he felt she should know what those years had contained. He wrote about his father's death and the missed funeral. He wrote about the morning he had made a decision to keep going, and about how many mornings like that there had been. At the end of the letter he wrote, "You were 9 years old. You were frightened. You told the truth as you understood it. The system that took your 9-year-old understanding and built a life sentence on it. That is where the weight of this belongs." Lily Cartwright has spoken publicly about her experience and has worked since then as an advocate for eyewitness identification reform. She and Daniel Souza have met once, in person, in 2016. Neither has spoken publicly about what was said. The science of eyewitness memory has been settled for decades. It has simply not been applied consistently in courtrooms. Studies conducted since the 1970s have demonstrated repeatedly that eyewitness testimony, particularly cross-racial identification, identification made under stress, and identification made in poor light conditions, is significantly less reliable than juries tend to believe. The confidence a witness expresses has almost no correlation with the accuracy of their identification. A witness who says, "I am completely certain," is not more likely to be correct than a witness who says, "I think it was him." Child witnesses present particular challenges. Children are more susceptible to suggestion than adults. They are more responsive to authority figures. They are more likely to interpret an interviewer's reactions as feedback about whether their answers are correct. This does not make children dishonest. It makes them human and young, and embedded in a social world where adults signal approval and disapproval, and children respond to those signals. Lily Cartwright was not dishonest. She was 9 and frightened, and surrounded by adults who needed an answer. Since the early 2000s, significant reforms to eyewitness identification procedures have been implemented across many U.S. states and in the United Kingdom. Blind lineup administration, where the officer conducting the lineup does not know which person is the suspect, is now standard in many jurisdictions. Video recording of lineup procedures is increasingly required. Expert testimony on eyewitness reliability is now more routinely admitted. These reforms came too late for Daniel Souza, but they exist in part because of cases like his. Daniel Souza is 61 years old. He lives in Portland, Oregon, in a small apartment near the river. He returned to education, not as a classroom teacher, which no longer felt possible, but as a volunteer tutor working with adults who are learning to read. He says the work keeps him connected to something he recognized in himself a long time ago, something that 19 years of imprisonment could diminish but not destroy. The state of Oregon compensated him with $412,000, the maximum available under state law at the time, which had been raised since Marcus Webb's era. His attorneys argued the amount was inadequate. Daniel did not comment publicly on the compensation. He said the number was not the point. He keeps a journal. He has kept one since 1997, filling notebooks in his cell year after year. He says writing was the thing that kept him from disappearing entirely, that putting words on paper was a way of insisting that he was still there, still himself, still a person with a life that mattered and thoughts worth recording. He is not married. He says he made peace with that. When asked what he wants people to understand about his story, he says this: "I am not asking for pity. I am asking for attention. Pay attention to how the system handles memory. Pay attention to what we ask witnesses to do and what we ask juries to believe. Pay attention because the mechanisms that put me in prison are still operating right now in courtrooms across this country." He pauses when he says this, in the way of someone who has spent a long time thinking about something and has finally distilled it to its essence. And then he says, "Someone is sitting in a cell tonight who should not be there. I don't know their name. You don't know their name, but they exist, and they are waiting for someone to look closely enough. We ask an enormous amount of human memory. We ask it to be a perfect witness, to hold with total fidelity the details of a traumatic event seen briefly in poor light, and then to reproduce those details months or years later in a courtroom, under oath, with a life hanging in the balance. Memory cannot do this. Memory has never been able to do this. And yet we have built a justice system that, in many of its most important moments, rests on the assumption that it can." Lily Cartwright was 9 years old and frightened, and she remembered wrong. She did not do this on purpose. She did not do this out of malice. She did it because she was human, and because the conditions under which her memory was recorded and retrieved were conditions almost designed to produce error. Daniel Souza paid for that error with 19 years. The system that created those conditions paid with nothing. That is the story. That is all of it. And the only honest question left, the one that stays with me long after the details of any individual case have faded, is this one: how many more are there?